Russian tanks on the move into eastern Ukraine, into areas already under the control of pro-Russian separatist forces. But the fear is this is the start of something much worse. Here, the Prime Minister told MPs he believes Vladimir Putin is establishing the pretext for a full-scale offensive.
I think honourable members will struggle to understand to contemplate how in the year 2022 a national leader might calmly and deliberately plot the destruction of a peaceful neighbour. And yet the evidence of his own words suggests that is exactly what President Putin is doing.
Last night, the Russian president formally signed decrees recognizing the independence of two breakaway regions in Ukraine. And he accused the West of trying to help Ukraine develop nuclear weapons and questioned whether that country even had a right to exist. Olga Tokaryuk, a Ukrainian journalist, listened to that speech. She says it didn't frighten her or her friends.
When you hear a president of a neighboring country, a nuclear power, saying absolutely dehumanizing, racist, colonial things about your country and your right actually to exist as a representative, as a citizen of this country, that fills you with anger, but also with determination to fight and to defend your country and to defend your life.
Now the West must respond.
Keine Zertifizierung der Pipeline erfolgen kann.
Today, the German Chancellor said his country will pause the completion of Nord Stream 2, an important pipeline built to import Russian gas. And the British government said it will freeze the UK assets of 5 banks and 3 individuals.
This is the first tranche, the first barrage of what we are prepared to do. And we hold further sanctions at readiness to be deployed alongside the United States and the European Union if the situation escalates still further.
But analysts say for too long Britain's tolerated corrupt Russian money.
I think the government has been too slow to give themselves the legislation and then the willpower to crack down on that. That's what we've got to do now, root out Russian corrupt money from London and make the elite really feel that they are paying a price here.
Protesters outside the Russian embassy in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Ukrainians are now waiting to find out if the defence of their country's independence will demand much more of them than this. Andy Bell, 5 News.
Well, Ukraine might feel a long way away, but it is in Europe, and the effects of what happens there are felt right around the globe, including here in the UK. And Julian's here to explain why. Julian.
Yeah, Sean, let's look again at where we're talking about. This is Donetsk and Luhansk, these are the 2 Moscow-backed rebel regions, which they self-declared themselves as republics in 2014. Now, overnight, troops and armour were moved in after President Putin recognised their independence. What was one of the first effects? Well, the global markets fell almost immediately, although they've been jittery for a few weeks. This is where it starts to filter through to millions of people. If you've got a pension, it'll be linked to stocks and shares, so the value of your pension will have fallen today. Oil prices, though, have actually risen. That's because Russia is a major oil producer, the second biggest in the world. Any instability around Russia sends it soaring. That affects the price of pretty much everything and the cost of transporting goods as well.
The oil price has soared up to almost $100 a barrel, more than double what it was about a year ago. So straight away, when you go to your local garage to fill your car up with petrol, you're going to start to feel the pain of that very soon.
So what's happening in Ukraine will have a real and immediate impact on people's pockets here.
Unfortunately, yes. Russia is the world's biggest supplier of natural gas. So if they hike prices or reduce supply, then energy bills will go up even further than they were. What can the West do if they don't want to send troops in? Well, we've heard lots today in Andy's report about sanctions. That is essentially putting a country on the naughty step. Lots of economic sanctions are being considered at the West, doing things like freezing the assets of wealthy Russian individuals, blocking Russia from sending goods overseas. But do they actually work?
There are some who claim that sanctions haven't worked very well in the 8 years since they were imposed after Russia annexed Crimea and started interfering in eastern Ukraine. In fact, they have significantly slowed down the growth of the Russian economy. And it's telling that Russia has spent so much time and effort trying to get sanctions lifted.
Certain things the UK won't do. Boris Johnson saying today they won't remove the children of wealthy Russian oligarchs from British schools. They said that's out of the question. But this is just the start of tightening the screws on Russia to see if something, anything, has an effect.
All right, Julian, thanks very much for that. Let's go back to Andy Bell now. Andy, after weeks of talks and warnings, it feels like the worst-case scenario could now be happening. Do you think the crisis is going to escalate?
Well, that's certainly the fear in London and in other Western capitals. If you listen to Boris Johnson's statement today, he said that everything they had predicted, everything they had feared over the last few hours had played out as they had expected. That is, for instance, destabilization on the eastern edge of Ukraine as a pretext for Russian forces to go in to restore some kind of order. So at the moment, that is playing out in the way that Western governments had always feared. Now, the British government and others are saying there is still some room for diplomacy. They're not going to give up on that, but clearly that door is closing fast as far as they're concerned. And there's very little indication from Vladimir Putin at this stage that he is interested in diplomacy, given that the steps that have been taken over the last few hours. And when you have that many troops that the Russians have now on the borders of Ukraine, you can't keep them there indefinitely. It becomes very expensive, it becomes very difficult. There comes a moment where you have to decide whether you're going to use those troops or not for a full-scale invasion. And certainly in Western capitals, they believe that moment of decision is coming very soon.
All right, more on this later. For the moment, thanks very much, Andy.